Hey guys, I'm Dave and welcome to the Trull Gallery. Today we're not going to make one, but two adjustable dado jigs for use with the router. I've got a project coming up that requires dados of two different widths, and cutting with a router is probably the easiest way to do it with the large panels that I have. I've made jigs like this before, but they were always a fixed width and required the use of a bushing on my router. These are going to be totally adjustable and designed around my palm router. There are a lot of videos out there showing how to make jigs like this, but the one that inspired my design came from James over at Stumpy Nubs, and I'll add his link below. But for now, let's just take a look and see how my jigs came together.
To start this build, I ripped down some half-inch plywood to 3 inches wide and about 39 inches long. By building my jigs this long, I can cut the dados on both sides of my piece at one time, ensuring that they'll stay lined up. I also cut down some 1/4 inch plywood to 3 1/4 inches wide, and it was about the same length. While I was at the table saw, I cut a 1 inch wide rabbet in the half-inch ply, just deep enough for that 1/4 inch plywood to nest into. I added a bead of glue to the rabbet and fastened the 1/4 inch plywood to the half-inch ply. A few 3/8 inch long 23 gauge pins hold things in place while I clamp them all together. I wiped off the glue squeeze out, stacked the two halves of the jig together, and then added a caul to distribute the clamping pressure. Once it was thoroughly clamped up, I set it aside to dry. Once the glue had cured, it was over to the miter saw to square up one end on each half. I wanted a working distance between the stops to be 33 inches, so I set both the stops at one end, measured my 33 inches, and then cut the pieces at the same time. I plan to use a 1/4 inch spiral bit to cut my dados, so I chucked that bit into my palm router and clamped one of the halves to my table. Now I could run the base of the router along the half-inch plywood fence, cutting the thinner ply to the correct width. A little hand sanding to get rid of any splinters, and I could repeat the process for the other half. For the end stop of the jig, I cut two pieces of 3/4 inch plywood to about 11 1/4 inches long and 3 inches wide. These dimensions aren't critical, they just gave me the width I had in mind. On one of the stops, I cut a clearance area so the router bit could spin freely before and after cutting a dado. One side of the stop was glued and brad nailed to the first half of the jig. Since this stop will act as a registration point, take the time to ensure that it sits square to the long side of the jig. Then I just flip the jig and attach the second stop to the same side of the jig, again using glue and brads. To locate the starting position of the second side of the jig, I loosely clamped it in place and made adjustments until the base of the router slid smoothly along the jig. With the jig clamped together, I marked the inside location for my fasteners. I used a 1/16 inch drill bit, drilling through the adjustment side of the jig and the stop on both ends of the jig. I figure I'd almost never need to cut rabbets wider than 1 1/4 inches, so I moved the adjustable side out to that width, transferred the location of the pilot hole from the stop up to the face on that side. With my start and stop locations marked, I took the two adjustable sides of the jig to the drill press where I had chucked up a 1/4 inch bit. Two through holes on either end marked the location of my soon-to-be slot. While I was at the drill press, I used the same bit to drill one hole on each of the stop blocks that I had located with that 1/16 inch drill bit. I came back later using a 17/64 bit just to give me a little more clearance room. Now I could clamp a straight edge onto the adjustable side of the jig, and using my palm router with that 1/4 inch spiral bit, I could create the groove between the start and stop holes. 2 or 3 light passes were all it took to cut through the stock. A little light sanding and I could flip it around and repeat the process on the other end. To connect the adjustable side, I tapped in a 1/4 20 by 1.5 inch carriage bolt. These were just long enough to hold, so I used the threaded knob to help seat the bolts. Then I removed the knobs, added a washer, and replaced the knobs. I later replaced these with 2-inch bolts. The second jig started much like the first. 2 strips of 3/4-inch plywood cut down to 39 inches by 3.5 inches, and 2 end stops cut to 9.5 inches by 2 3/4 inches. Again, the dimensions aren't critical. Like before, one of the end strips has the cutout area for the start and stop of the router bit. I glued and pinned the first end stop to one long side of the jig after ensuring the 2 pieces were square to each other. Then I flipped the jig around and attached the second stop to that same long side, again with glue and pins. I'm not sure why, but I decided that a 2-inch max dado would be more than I'd ever use. So I clamped the second long side in place 2 inches from the first side, both top and bottom. Then I could drill a 16th-inch pilot hole for the adjustment of bolts on both ends. I adjusted the location of the loose side until it was about 3/8 of an inch from the fixed side. I transferred the location of that pilot hole from the stop to the adjustable side and marked both ends. Then I drilled pilot holes at those locations. After enlarging those holes to 1/4 inch at the drill press, I was ready to cut the slots on the adjustable side. I had that 1/4 inch bit in my palm router and used that to set the location of my fence. Simply drop the bit into one of the pre-drilled holes, set a straight edge against the router base, check for square, and clamp it down. I also checked the location with the bit at the second hole before clamping the fence in its final location. Again, a couple of passes with the router, working from hole to hole and then adjusting the depth, and my slot was complete. I gave it a quick cleanup with my random orbit sander and repeated the process on the other end. The 2 sides of the jig were held together, this time with 2-inch long by 1.25 carriage bolts, and it was ready for a test spin. To set the width of your dado, you just set your stock into the jig and clamp the 2 sides snug. I added a strip of painter's tape to my shelf stock to give me a little more space for glue and a little wiggle room. Here you can see that I've got the 2 sides of my case clamped together, and they'll stay that way until all of the dados are cut. This ensures that they'll stay in alignment. I set my palm router with a 1/2 inch diameter pattern bit and set the depth for a light cut, or about 1/8 of an inch. Now it's not that I don't trust my jigs, but I made sure to mark one side of the dado on both pieces of stock and line the jig up to those marks. You know, just in case. I'm not sure what happened to my camera, but I ran the router up one side and down the other, working in a clockwise fashion, as you can clearly see by this amazing footage. Well, maybe you can hear the amazing footage. I readjusted my depth, made a second pass, and it was time to check the fit of my shelf. A nice snug fit with virtually no gaps. The piece I'm working on needed a smaller dado for the bottom shelves, so it's time for jig number 1. I set the adjustable fence so that the base of my router fits snugly between the 2 sides. With that done, I changed to a 1/4 inch spiral bit and set my bit depth. I clamped the jig in place and made the first pass, running the router up and back before shutting it off at that open space of the jig. Doing this helps to clean out the dado and prevents the bit from hitting your stock or the jig if you were to pull it up in the middle. I did get a little tear out on the right side. That was probably caused by 2 things. First, I think I took too deep of a cut on that first pass. And second, is the incredibly poor quality plywood that's currently available around here. Luckily, a light sanding got rid of the fuzz, and that'll all be hidden by the bottom shelf rabbet.
These jigs came together really easily. They're made from scrap stock and they're a breeze to set up. And unlike my old templates, they're fully adjustable and I don't have to fuss around with my router templates. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video. Was there something I could have done differently? Smarter, easier, safer? Drop them in the comments below. I'd also love to hear what kind of jigs you use to cut your dados. If you enjoyed this video, maybe give us a thumbs up and share it with friends. If you haven't already, maybe it's time to hit that subscribe button, little bell, so you get notified each time I put out a new video. As always, I'm never really sure what's coming up next, but I think it'll be interesting. So for now, have a great day, stay safe, and take care. We'll see you soon.